YouTube. Mr. King coming at you live from the studio today. So today we're going to be talking about developing science skills using constructivism. And if you want to pause the video now, here's the objective and the agenda for today. First, I want to start off. Science is shifting, where a lot of the new standards or the next generation science standards are having students carrying out and planning the investigations themselves. When I was growing up, we were usually given the procedures and just asked to follow the directions. Whereas nowadays, the students are going to be designing the experiments themselves. And we're going to be going over how that looks different based on the grade level. So we're going to start with a thermal energy transfer standard. So in high school, students need to plan and conduct an investigation about how thermal energy transfer differs between a closed and an open system. In middle school, students need to experiment on how the type of matter, the mass, and the shape of an object changes based on the thermal energy transfer. But even in K through 5, students are going to be conducting and planning out experiments. They are just going to be much more simple. So like, for example, at the elementary level, students are explaining how different objects are affected by sunlight. And they're going to be having to figure that out themselves using materials given by the educator. And a framework that we're going to be using is called Constructivism. And I have this nice infographic to show the viewer how does Constructivism work. So as you can see here, traditionally teachers, they talk about profit and loss and the students listen. Whereas today it's encouraged that educators are having the students learn by doing. So instead of talking about profit and loss, they have students do a cupcake sale, and they have to actually explain how the profit and loss is impacted, like when doing business. So the idea is that constructivism shifts students to learn about things more in depth and a little bit more with better recall, because it's usually better to learn by doing. And then in similarity to NGSS was conceptualized so students could better learn 21st century skills rather than memorizing. So both of these shifts in education, I think, have synergy, and that's what we'll be talking about today. Okay? Next, we're going to be talking about a differentiated lesson, and we're going to start with elementary school. So, in elementary school, students need to place different objects in the sunlight. How could we have a student-centered approach with someone as young as elementary school? Well, what you could do is have students decide the independent and the dependent variable through class or peer discussion. And it could be good to give the kids options, like, should we be taking pictures or should we be measuring temperature to see how different objects are impacted by sunlight? What kind of objects do we want to use? Something that I thought of is that students may have fun bringing different materials from their home and trying to see how their toys are impacted and how the size and the type of toy is impacted by being in the sunlight. This is an example of having the students be a little bit more interactive rather than just following the procedure given by the teacher. Similarly, in middle school, students need to plan out an investigation, but now they need to be seeing how shape, size, and type of material are impacted by temperature. So what a student-centered constructivist teacher could do is give the students the scientific question, how does size and material affect thermal energy transfer, and then give the students a wide array of materials, and then the students must collaborate to design their own procedure given the question and the materials. So that's a way that learners can be a little bit more interactive. They have to come up with the ideas themselves and collect the data based on what they decide. In high school, it is very similar to middle school where they need to conduct their own investigation about thermal energy transfer, but now there's a bigger emphasis on closed and open systems. So students need to generate their own scientific question based on a phenomenon, and the educator needs to guide students to better hit the standard based on the questions that the kids ask. And it is a little bit more complex because the students need to decide how can they approximate a closed system. Next, I wanted to give some lab ideas to try and help students see the benefit of why we learned about this in the first place. So something we did in my middle school classes, we made solar ovens, and this would be great for the high school standard, where a student needs to create a solar oven that reduces heat loss to try and create that closed system. And middle school, instead of using metal and wood, we used food. So we talked about how the size and type of food affects the thermal energy transfer when we cook. And then for the elementary school kids, what happens when different types of toys are placed in the sunlight? How is slime versus like an action figure versus like a string doll? How are all these different types of toys impacted when they're in the sunlight? And then I've been avoiding talking about college this far because it is a completely different challenge having constructivism in a college setting. The reason is because usually you have hundreds of students and one professor. So naturally, we've had the same style of lectures for hundreds of years where students are expected to learn a large amount of information at a very deep level. But something that I read that a lot of professors are trying to do to shift to student-centered learning is, yes, having these lecture-style halls with lots of students, but having more polling, asking students to submit questions and answers on their phone to try and have the educator adapt to the lesson in person. We also have been using like QR codes and inquiry-based labs when the kids are in a smaller setting. Next, I do want to talk about the behavior and tips and tricks for different age groups. I've taught high school and 8th grade science, and 9th and 8th graders are a lot different from 10th, 11th, and 12th graders. The older the student, typically the less you have to tell them the expectations and the procedures for a lab day. But the younger ones, they need to be practicing lab expectations for several months before they really are comfortable doing an investigation themselves. That is the biggest takeaway that I've learned through my time. College students are the most independent, and they should be rarely giving out the answer, and they need to be expected to plan and carry out an investigation independently with only minimal guidance. And the whole reason why we're doing this, remember, is because science standards are shifting where students need to be more independent and critically think more. And having a student-centered framework, constructivism, will help the educator and the students be more ready to use their own creativity and ideas to learn. So the more that an educator shifts to learner-centered instruction, that will help them plan and carry out their investigations for the NGSS standards. And there's also been multiple studies that have shown that the more learner-centered instruction, the more students are engaged and the better student outcomes, like test scores, there will be. And thank you so much for sticking with me. Here are my references. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you so much for staying with me the whole time.